Good morning. Now, it's great to be with you here in Magalies. It felt like a Kentucky drive-through to experience because I'm just staying around, here down in Schoemansville. And normally, when I get invited to these this is my third life work retreat that I'm doing. I think the first one was in Broederstroom, and then I got lost last year in Pretoria. And this time around, I knew exactly where I'm getting to. Thanks very much, Ruan and Steve, for the confidence that you've placed in me to come and share a few life experiences with you today. And I trust that at the end of the day, if I don't convince you, that I will at least confuse you. But if you have your pens and I've been asked to speak on the subject of diversity in the workplace, I'd like you to work with me just by way of introduction, and we're going to do a small little exercise. And I want you to take your pens, and you all have notepads, and I want us to do a little exercise together. I want you to take your pen and write as many times as possible your name, your first name, okay? Whilst I'm timing you. And once I say stop, you must stop. Stop. I had to stop you because others said it's getting better. Let's just share some experiences on how did it feel to write with a different hand. Any views? Awkward. Inappropriate. Strange. Frustrating. Any other experiences? Childish. Chinese. Difficult. Embarrassing. What embarrassed you? Slow. Uncomfortable, I like that. Refusing. Are you rebellious or what? Incompetent. Less. Exhausting. Funny. Okay, what are we trying to communicate here? In the next few minutes, I need to engage with you on the subject of diversity in the workplace. And I want to tell you, this is what diversity is all about. When you embark on this journey, it's going to look awkward. When you embark on this journey, it's going to initially look inappropriate. Things are working well. Why fix a thing that's not broken? It's going to look strange. It's going to be frustrating because the pace might be slow and some of the objectives that you've set for yourself might not immediately be realized. And all these things, sometimes it will look embarrassing because you're going to make mistakes. And people will call you names and call you out for no apparent reason. Sometimes you can, as honestly as my friend next to Alida said there, I'll just point blank refuse. Ek gaan nie die goed doen nie. Dis nonsens die man. Incompetent. How am I going to go about this? I've never done this thing before. And I hope that you'll appreciate that there are no quick fixes to this thing. It's going to be a process. And in the next few minutes, I want to share with you my understanding of the process and also share with you some life experiences on how I went about going through diversity. And I want to frame my input this morning around the theme, Mastermind, what the Master had in mind. mastermind what the master had in mind. Now, as our society becomes more complex, our ability to keep all these things together becomes more challenging. There's just so many moving parts that we need to contend with. So many, the rapid changes that's happening both in our internal and external environment. And you know, in my own little life, I don't know about you, but a lot of things doesn't make sense to me at some stage. And what does it mean to mastermind? I looked at the dictionary, and the word mastermind implies the following: to plan a complex activity in detail and make sure that it happens successfully. Going about a difficult task in a skillful manner. And if they call you a mastermind, it's that type of person who directs and supplies creative intelligence for a project. And we are here because we want to make a difference in our workplace. And as the Bible says in Acts 17, verse 28, for in him we live and move and have our being. We need to have a grasp of what the Master had in mind, even in the space of diversity in our workplaces. And yes, we might not know how to go about these things. We might not at all times, it might look inappropriate. But Paul writes to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 16, we have the mind of Christ, which means if any one of us lack wisdom, we've got a source, a supreme supply of wisdom to tap into, to guide us and navigate this difficult situation that we sometimes need to go through. Now, we came a long way, and just the other day, on the 11th of February, we commemorated the release of Nelson Mandela from prison in 1990 after sacrificing close to 27 years, which I believe was for a just cause. And when he made his inauguration speech after the first democratic election, he casted a vision of a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world. Now, a lot of water went under the bridge for us to create this new rainbow nation that is at peace with itself and at peace with the world. And yes, we've accomplished a lot of beautiful things in this country, but let me also be brutally frank with you this morning. There's also a lot of things that's gone terribly wrong. Am I talking to the right audience here? There is, however, this uncomfortable piece of work which South African people and organizations have not properly engaged with, and that is the eradication of discrimination in all its forms. Now, Solomon puts it so beautiful. In Songs of Solomon 2, verse 15, he says, catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. The one moment we're hosting the World Cup, the one moment we're conquering areas which was unheard of, and the next moment there's a flare-up of racism on a beach or whatever the case might be. These little foxes, our vineyards are in bloom, and all of a sudden, these foxes. Now, what are these foxes? Foxes represent all the hindrances, irritations, and contradictions that detract from our ability to bring about a free, equal, and united nation, focus on creating a prosperous country. Now, given our unfortunate past, regrettably, race has become a body marker, and it remains deeply entrenched in the psyche of our nation. It performs a function of dividing human beings and thereby robbing us of that opportunity to coexist in harmony as equals. I'm of the view that the dream of a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world has not been followed through with urgency, persistence, and attention to detail. And there are two elements that contributed to this. The first element is a thing called apathy. That lack of feeling, emotion, interest, and concern. You see, beloved, just because me and you can now legally stay wherever we want, and our children can go to any school of our choice, we can use any public amenity and engage in whatever recreational activity, it does not always mean that we do it out of a conviction of a shared identity and authentic acknowledgement of each other's humanity. And you know, we also do not talk about discrimination in an empowering way. Most of the time when these things rear its ugly head, we respond from a position of protest and from a position of frustration. And it's our inability to constructively continue this conversation until we have real and meaningful progress in this regard. The second thing that led to it is political correctness. What do I mean with political correctness? It is a situation where we do not want to upset the apple cart and an almost reluctance to challenge the status quo. If I speak up against this thing, they're going to call me a racist. Am I talking to the right audience? Yeah. If I'm appointing people for accountability, they're going to give me all manner of names. And sometimes, you know, when people are called to account, they conveniently take out the race card. You see, this Lani is untransformed. This Lani is reactionary. This one doesn't want us to do this, that, and the other. And we became politically correct, and we don't want to challenge the status quo. Now, there's a book that I've read a few years ago, and I would strongly recommend that you read the book of Ed Silvoso, Anointed for Business. And one of the quotes he made there was quite striking. He says, God's agenda for this generation and the chief catalytic force to bring that about will be Christian leaders ministering in the marketplace. I believe that an accountant, carpenter, doctor, teacher, whatever profession you can put in there, is just as much a minister as a TV evangelist, and that his or her life and business practice are his or her most effective sermon. What are we saying to each other here? Based on this powerful statement, it reminds us of what the Master had in mind. In Matthew 5, verse 13 to 16, he used three very powerful metaphors there. The salt of the earth, the light of the world, the city on the hill that cannot be hidden. And this metaphor speaks of influence, which means wherever me and you are going, wherever we find ourselves in our immediate sphere of influence, we must bring about a change. We need to leave the place better than we are in the state in which we found in. And yes, he's calling us to be salt. He's calling us to be light. He's calling us, when people are battling with diversity, they need to go to the city on the hill and say, look at company A, look at company B. They're really a benchmark on how people can work together in harmony. And they are really an example worth emulating. You see, we've been called to influence the decadent, selfish, dog eats dog. This rat race kind of mentality in the organizational culture that has become so pervasive in the marketplace. I read recently an article from the Harvard Journal about organizational culture, and this definition struck me, where the author says that culture is the tacit social, organizational culture is about a culture that is the tacit social order of an organization. It shapes the attitudes and behaviors in wide-ranging and durable ways. Cultural norms define what's encouraged, what's discouraged, what's accepted or rejected within a group. When properly aligned with personal values, drives, and needs, culture can unleash tremendous amounts of energy toward a shared purpose and foster an organization to thrive. You see, one of the greatest catalysts that can bring about this healthy organizational culture is for us to be cognizant of the power of diversity. You see, diversity is a business imperative. It's no more a nice to have in any business, and it's been scientifically proven that diversity brings about higher morale. You know, when people feel validated and there's an inclusive culture in an organization, it boosts the morale of everybody that's associated with that organization. But once you have an exclusive culture and it's them and us, people's morale will not be enhanced. Secondly, diversity brings about different perspectives. I, in my lifetime, have always been astounded how some of the brightest ideas did not necessarily come from the exco or whatever, but right down by opening up space for different ideas to critique our endeavors and so on. Some of the brightest ideas have been bubbling underneath the surface. But then we've got to create that culture which is inclusive. It is also about making greater global impact. Nowadays, the buzzword in town is globalization. And a lot of countries are moving across the border. I did some work on diversity in the workplace in one of the big agricultural co-ops in the country. And they're expanding now into places like Zambia, Zimbabwe, and so on. And they're bringing some of those managers on placement here in South Africa to understand the culture and the DNA of the organization. And I must tell you, one of the reasons I've been brought in is because, you know, it was also, there was this fear of an inclusive culture because it's a strong Afrikaans-oriented, farmer-oriented kind of culture there, en wie is hulle nou? Wat nou my baas geraak? You know, this company wants to take on Africa, and they've got the means to do that. But they will not do it unless they have the right people on the ground that understand the culture of Zambia, of Zimbabwe, and those places to move their business forward. Do I make sense, beloved? It's also about better corporate citizenry. A lot of work is done nowadays in corporate social investment. And gone are the days when you can just sign a check and, you know, Photoshop there, and we are in the Beeld or whatever, newspaper and so on, and that's the end of the story. No. Nowadays, it's about impact investments in the community, and you can only make an impact if you understand the cultural nuances in that community in which you operate. What are the things that, you know, that you need to understand to make sure that you're accepted there and that your impact is embraced in a manner that does not just smack of handouts, doesn't just smack of entitlement, but is worked towards an inclusive partnership. Allow me to share my journey now with you. You look so serious in this class. You make me nervous. Now, I come from a place called Alabama, in Klerksdorp. The eldest of 8 children, or 8 siblings. Don't ask my father why so many. I've never asked him. But, you know, I was brought up in very impoverished circumstances. But I always had destiny on my mind. Leadership just became so natural to me. And as I progressed in life, I was brought up in a very strict religious setup as well. Ek het as apostolie groot geraak. Julle ken die apostolie kerk, die AGS. And you know, there was a time when I just drifted away from all these things and I was out in the world having fun and not bothering with anything. That time I also joined the nursing profession. And I was actually a nurse for 17 years. Can you believe that? And yes, during that time, two important things happened in my life. One, in Ward 7, night duty, 1979. I was working with one of my senior colleagues, and I told you, we normally work for 7 nights on and 7 nights off. It was the longest 7 nights off in my life, because I realized something happened to me. And in those days, there were no cell phones in 79. And when the lady came back, I tell you, I called an urgent meeting of the tender board, and I put in an unsolicited bid there to say, hey, lady, can we, and struggling to say some words, and my first offer was rejected. I relented, and I pursued, and through God's grace, we've now been married for 37 years, and blessed with 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Another important milestone, on the 10th of October 1980, we were married on the 4th of December 1981. On the 10th of October 1982, in a small little church, the word of God came to me that evening. Satan wanted to sift you, but I prayed for you. And I tell you, when the altar call came out, I was the first to go. Nobody pushed me, nobody forced me. There was no fire and brimstone stuff, you turn or you burn kind of preaching. No, it was just an embracement of God's love. And I walked in there, and through God's grace, my life was turned around, and yes, I'm still standing by His grace. I stayed in a place in a colored township called Alabama. My children attended an Indian school in Mansell Park. I worked at a predominantly black hospital, Tsepong Hospital, and Sundays I used to go to Rhema Church, where we were only 6 black families, and a white pastor for that matter. And then they will sing songs like, this is our land, this is our nation. And you're asking, what? And you've seen how the comrades have been shot here, and they've been brought in there. And the guys will stand up and prophesy, no weapon formed against us shall prosper. This is our land. What's happening here? We'll talk about it some other time. It was great learning and unlearning experiences for me. I was very active in my community, and at some stage, I was in a lot of community activities, living out my faith amongst those that are destitute, those that didn't have a voice, and so on. And the ruling party approached me in 1993. I submitted it to my pastor. We prayed about it, and he also sensed that this is the direction that God is leading me. Ended up in the Northwest Provincial Legislature in 1994. Got sworn in the Saturday. The next week, Wednesday, my life turned around because the Premier called us in. Long speech there. And after that, he read the names of the guys that's going to be part of his executive team. And lo and behold, number 7 was Martin Kuscus. And guess what portfolio? The finance portfolio will go to Martin Kuscus. And I didn't know a debit from a credit. And here I'm called upon to manage 5.8 billion rand. Talk about faith, Alina. I really needed faith. My wife had to pray in the morning when I leave home just so that God can give me wisdom to meet Saul Kirsner and not make mistakes. Through God's grace, I survived 10 years in politics. And go and consult your friend Google. He will tell you there are no skeletons in the cupboard through God's grace. I stood there and lived out my faith. Now when your name appears at the golf course as an honorary member, then you know your time is up. And when you go now to Leopard Park Golf Course, you'll see Martin Kuscus, honorary member here. Can't play golf Wednesdays and Saturdays. It's criminal. It's time to work. So I left there, and I ended up at the South African Bureau of Standards. And, that was another place. Because just 10 days before my arrival, this one guy lost his disciplinary case, And nobody knew that he came with a gun into the premises. Whilst they were busy with the HR clearance process, he went into his supervisor's office, the lady's name was Jenny, and he shot her twice and turned the gun on himself. He died before. Jenny died 2 days after that in that little company of Mary Hospital. And 10 days after that, here comes the new CEO. The atmosphere was loaded. To God's grace, we turned that place around. I brought in some external expertise as well. Who knows on Blackie Swart here? You know Blackie Swart? I brought in Blackie there, Dr. David Malapo, Dr. Ketsu Mabusela, and we went through a very interactive process on how to define the new SABS, challenging these paradigms, and so on. We ultimately reached a consensus how this new SABS should look like, crafted a roadmap, and made sure that we put it on the right track. How did we get it right? You know, when I came in there, it was a totally dysfunctional organization. But to maintain momentum, I had to choose champions. And champions not at the top, but right through the spectrum of the organization. And they had to drive some of the change initiatives there. But secondly, I had also to lead by example. You see, it's one thing to say something, it's another thing to live it. And yes, in the very second year of my tenure there, I had to get rid of my marketing manager, tongue-speaking, born-again child of God, because he stole money from my credit, from the company's credit card. To get rid of him. I had to get rid of the marketing executive. And we had zero tolerance on any nonsense that smacks of corruption, of impropriety, and we had to build a new world-class organization. I also had to maintain authentic feedback. I used to have sessions called Martin's Moments With. And Martin would sit with 20 people from diverse ranks and different divisions, coffee, muffins, and basically just 3 questions that we will ask. What happened? What's missing? What's next? What happened? What's missing? What's next? How do you experience the current change in your environment? Is there anything missing that we don't see from the top here, that you're experiencing at the operational level? And as you tell us what's missing, we also brainstorm around what's next. And I tell you, there was such dynamic interaction, and it killed all the rumor mongers, because these people that used to, we're going to be retrenched, we're going to be this, those people became the chief drivers of change, because they will say, hey, you're talking nonsense. We were the CEO just yesterday, and this is what he said. That story of yours is not what we've heard yesterday. We also had to break glass ceilings. You know, it was a very male-dominated, technically oriented, people with 36 years of training and so on. They never had any other life. But you know, breaking these glass ceilings was a tough thing, because there were 2 things that drove that process. One was the legitimate expectations from new black entrants. These kids went to get their honors degrees in science and technology. They're doing MBAs at Wits and Tukkies and those things. And Mgavi and Mdavi don't want them in. Why? Mgavi and Mdavi also has legitimate fears. And how do you balance the fears with the legitimate expectations? Then I've discovered that Mgavi and Mdavi is not actually, they don't like this management thing. They're very good technically. So I created a technical career path and a managerial career path. I didn't touch Mgavi and Mdavi's salary, not at all. Mgavi became a chief technical specialist. He was no more called a general manager, chief technical specialist. And Tabi Singh is now busy with the MBA. She managed this thing, because jy weet Martin, ek like nie so lank aan vergaderings in sit nie. En die conforms wat ons invul. Ek wil net by die werk uitkom. He likes his white coat and he wants to be in the lab. And by so doing, I also told him, gaan weer om Dawie. Dus, oom, verstaan hom mooi. Within 3 years' time, you're going to retire. You need to write up for us, we had a knowledge management system. You need to write up for us all the procedures, how these things have been done, so that, because a lot of the knowledge was in their heads, you know, and it was never properly documented. And here is Ntabi saying, here is Farid, here's Tsepo, these ones you need to mentor for me because your successor needs to come from one of the three. And 30% of your bonus, Omgavi, depends on the time that you actually spend. And later Omgavi will come and say, man, het lyk vir my, om het maar gaan, jy weet. Die laities raak nou te slim vir my. Ja, you must see how this one has performed. How beautiful this one has been growing. The fear was gone. Because I didn't touch the human dignity. I acknowledged their expertise and I tapped into that. And by so doing, the other side of the business also grew because new managers started to flourish in that environment. We broke those glass ceilings, but we also celebrated achievements. We made a big song and dance about what's happening. What were the results? Firstly, we landed in the top 10 certification bodies in the world. Some stage when I left, we were number 6 in the world. Profitability increased, reduction in staff turnover. I was even elected on the ISO Council, as earlier said. I used to fly at least 5-6 times a year to Geneva, sitting with all these gray-haired guys, Dr. Paolo Scolari of Fiat and all those guys. And it was, SABS was regarded in very high esteem. We expanded internationally. My last assignment was to set up an office in Shanghai to do pre-shipment verification of cement, electrotechnical stuff, and the like. I've also been on the board of Netcare for the last 10 years. And one of my responsibilities is the Social and Ethics Committee. And diversity there also, from a disability point of view, in 2010, we only had 0.31% representation of people with disabilities. And we launched a vehicle called Sinaco. And this Sinaco vehicle was intentional to shift the dial to bring more disabled people into the mainstream of our operations. As I'm talking to you, last year's annual report, you'll see we now currently stand at 3.8%. But it was a conscious and deliberate effort. What am I saying here? There are biblical imperatives even for diversity. And we need to be cognizant of what the Master had in mind. I'm sure Steve has shared with you this morning about the woman at the well. He tells that story so beautifully. How Jesus selected his team of diverse people, tax collectors, fishermen. There was even a former EFF leader there. You know Simon the Zealot? He was also there. This is how clever Jesus was. I'm sure when a red beret walks in our church, we'll be very nervous. Not with Jesus. He created a diverse environment. Even in the Great Commission, he commanded us in Matthew 28 to go into the world. And because his whole mission was the salvation of the whole world, not for just a group of Galileans, but for the whole world. And therefore Paul could write to the Galatians, he said, there's no more Jew and Greek and free man and slave and male and female. We all one in Christ. Christ wanted to create an inclusive culture. Inclusivity and not exclusivity. How do we change the paradigms? Firstly, I want to raise a few questions with you. Who are your friends? You see, if your friendship circle only come from the boykies that you used to be in large school with and so on, you're going to be very, very impoverished in your outlook towards life. I've learned in my lifetime that there is so much richness in diversity. Each one has a story that needs to be validated. And I've widened my friendship circle and my life has been so much enriched about that. Secondly, What is my understanding of other people's life experiences? Do I actually know the lady that brings tea for me every day, is she just Anna to me? And the guy that's doing my gardening, is he just a Jonas for me? Or do I actually know about his underlying life experiences? What are the things that makes other people in your immediate sphere of influence, what makes them mad? What makes them glad? What makes them sad? Unless you go to that level of engagement, you will not be able to build an inclusive culture. Thirdly, who are my role models? When you ask any South African, who's your role model? Nelson Mandela. Come on. There are many more role models in South Africa. I've got role models across the color spectrum. I've got role models not only in the top echelons, but there are some gray-headed wimmies there, whose life I emulate because they've got stable marriages that I go and sit with. Chris sê vir my, hoe doen jy die ding? There are great role models that personify stability. And you know, these are the type of people that we need to emulate. And across the color divide, who are your role models? Some of you might have heard that I've been with the Afrikaans Handelsinstituut at some stage. And you know, I will go to Potgietersrus, meneer die president, with a chain like a mayor, and go and address those long-bearded guys there. And you know, the moment I started quoting NP van Wyk, dan is die oomies baie goed. Meneer die president, jy het gepraat vanaand. Jy het diep gepraat, meneer die president. Jy het baie diep gepraat. Do I model the right values to my family? What's happening around our dinner table? You know what? Sometimes the type of things we say to our children, what we model there, that's what they're taking out into the outside world. Because if dad holds a specific view, that's how our children are going to see the outside world. And how do we prepare our children to engage with an increasingly, diverse world environment there? Some of our children don't even have these hang-ups, but we keep on reminding them, jy moet versigtig wees. Must be careful, hy mense. Vra jy vir my. Fifthly, guard your heart against stereotyping and generalization. You can't, for the life of me, generalize about everybody. All white people are like that. Do you really know how many white people are there? About 4 or 5 million in the country? Do you know 5 million white people? Come on, for heaven's sake. You don't know 5 million. Now, how can you, one incident that happened in a shopping mall, define what white people is all about? Do you know 40 million black people? On what authority can you say, blacks are like that? You can't. Because, Chaminda Adichie said, the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue. Yes, that incident happened. But that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And that's the danger that generalizations and stereotyping can bring about. Sixthly, be vigilant against unconscious bias. What do we mean with bias? It's that prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or a group compared with another, and usually considered to be unfair. And every time me and you need to check our hearts all the time, am I unconsciously biased? What I'm doing here, is it informed to favor one above the other? And people are watching us, especially in leadership positions. The seventh thing is we must create opportunities to engage open discussion about the realities of racism and discriminatory practices in our workplace. So in that case, I will forever respect Richard Friedland. We've ticked all the boxes, EE reports, females, all those type of things. We ticked all the boxes, but Richard launched a special program. He said, diversity beyond the numbers. That was his program. And he went into staff engagement, and it was horrific to find out the numbers look good, but the lived experiences of people were not the same. And therefore, we need to create, and once if he opened up, we even had to ask a few doctors to go, and because they were just outrightly racist. A black sister can't scrub for him, highly qualified, many years of experience, maar as sister, sorry nie, daar is nie, nee, ek gaan maar liewers nie opereer. Jy goed ken niks nie. And at the end of the day, we had to ask them to leave. Eighthly, we need to speak the truth in love. You see, it's not always what we say. It's how we say it. We can sometimes be so rightfully wrong. There's a way of saying it, and the test that we need to apply here, what is the motto of my heart? Now, if you thought Martin read these things in the Harvard Journal, let me demonstrate to you that Martin actually lives these things. That's my family. There is my wife in the middle, Elizabeth. I played Lobola, she's Tswana, okay? I'm the eldest Mokonyan at home, okay? I'm part of the delegation when we negotiate for Lobola. I'm the eldest son-in-law there. But then here's my eldest daughter, Esther. She left 5 weeks before the World Cup for Australia to follow the love of her life. Stephen, wonderful man of God, got born again in our church, wonderfully saved here, and since 2009 he's been serving the Lord, 10 years now. And there's my 2 grandchildren, Gabriel and Naomi. And in December when I went to Melbourne, it was so nice to be called Opa for 2.5 weeks. Opa, let's play hide and seek. 1, 2, 3. I'm still looking for a wife for my son Ezra, the one with the bald head. My only son is carrying the family name. I'm nervous when I leave this earth. And there's my baby girl, Zoe. Now, for a long time, I had to open up my mind to the realities of building a diverse environment. In our church, I'm glad to say that I've grown from those days of this is our land, this is our nation. I'm still with Rhema Church, but the demographics have changed, the leadership have changed, our whole approach has changed, and we've grown much wiser. I could have run away, but God made me to stay there and make a difference in that environment. Because I had to check my own heart as well and learn and unlearn from the fears and the legitimate expectations of others. I'm closing. Have you learned anything today? You look very serious. Are you processing? What are you processing? Real change comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. That's an essay which Martin Luther King wrote in a Birmingham jail, letters from a Birmingham jail. And I want to conclude by saying, whilst you are on this path of life work for this year, may God transform you. May God challenge your own paradigms. May God even disrupt some of those things that you held on so dearly and open up yourself to a new environment, a new world. Because who knows, God might take you tomorrow into an environment which you've never dreamed before, where His name needs, His kingdom needs to be established. And let's be the salt, let's be the light, let's be that city on the hill that cannot be hidden, and mastermind what the Master had in mind. God bless you.